Hi everyone, and welcome to the Art History Graduate Students Association's 15th Annual Conference, Empathie. My name is Megan Gaudet, and I've been acting as Special Project Coordinator and Graphic Designer for this year's conference. For those who were not in attendance for our previous sessions, briefly, this conference will address questions around empathy as it relates to art practice, theory, and history. We are interested in exploring the role of the arts in bridging the gap between feelings and action, especially regarding issues of gender, race, class, and ability. We are also concerned with the limits of empathy and what empathy can and cannot do with regards to reconciling discrimination and privilege.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle Sones, and I've been the other Special Projects Coordinator for this year's conference. I would like to begin this evening by acknowledging that the host institution of the Symposium, Concordia University, is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters where I am in Ojo Agi, Montreal. This is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and today it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We recognize the injustices that are part of the colonial history of this place, and we respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. We also want to acknowledge that the headquarters for Zoom, which is facilitating our virtual gathering, they occupy the Mukwema Ohlone territory in what is currently known as San Jose, California. Many of you are joining us today from other places on Turtle Island and around the world, and we encourage you to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. Please feel free to use the chat to say hello and let us know where you're tuning in from. The chat will remain open throughout the presentation, but we ask that you please submit any questions using the Q&A function, which you can find at the bottom of your screen, and we will be filtering through the audience questions during the moderated Q&A following tonight's keynote.
We would also like to take this opportunity to thank our funding bodies today, namely the Department of Art History, the Gail and Stephen A. Jaroslawski Institute for Studies in Canadian Art, the Graduate Students Association, and the Graduate Community Building Fund. We would also like to thank Brooke Nanskaville and Jordan Goldman for providing live ASL interpretation for this evening's keynote. We would also like to thank our amazing team of volunteers for helping us this weekend, namely Sarah Shields-Rivard, Maggie Hinbest, Michelle Sones, and myself.
So this evening, we are proud to host our closing keynote by Kosisochukwu Nnebe, moderated by artist and Concordia PhD student Ojo Agi. We're going to let Ojo introduce herself and Kosi further because unbeknownst to us, when we approached Ojo to moderate tonight's keynote, the two of them are already acquainted. So we are excited to have Kosi and Ojo in conversation tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Ojo.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Michelle and Megan, and the entire team at AHGSA, the Art History Graduate Studies Association, for this opportunity, for hosting this conference. I'm very excited to be here in conversation with Kosi. I'm a PhD student here in the Art History Department at Concordia. I'm a Nigerian-Canadian, just like Kosi, and I have my background in women and gender studies. It's such a pleasure to introduce Kosi. We've been acquainted for maybe 5 or 6 years now, and I've been a fan of her work for the entire time, and it's just a pleasure to see how her work has grown and to get to learn more from her. So without further ado, Kosisochukwu Nnebe is a Nigerian-Canadian visual artist, an economist by training, and a policy analyst by profession. Her visual arts practice aims to engage viewers on issues both personal and structural in ways that bring awareness to their own complicity. Her work has been exhibited at Nia Centre, the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, Place des Arts, the Art Gallery of Guelph, the Nia Centre, Studio 66, Z Art Space, Station 16, and the Mohr Gallery in Mountain View, California. She has given presentations on her artistic practice and research at universities across Quebec, including Laval, McGill, and Concordia, and has facilitated workshops at the National Gallery of Canada, the Ottawa Art Gallery, and Redwood City High School in California. She is currently based, it says in Ottawa, but she's currently based in London. Through interactive and installation-based pieces, audiences are made hyper-aware of their positionality within the physical space of a room, as in society, and how this shapes what is seen and unseen, what is understood, and what remains undecipherable. rooted as they are in her own lived experiences. Nnebe's works explore notions of interiority as well as publicness, agency and domination, self and other. Opacity and transparency are featured intermittently in her materials that at times obfuscate and other times transform to reveal a glimpse into new ways of seeing and being that have yet to be understood, even by the artist herself. So please join me in welcoming Kosisochukwu Nnebe.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, I am currently based in London, UK, which is definitely quite an experience at this time with everything that's going on with the pandemic. So yeah, my name is Kosisochukwu Nnebe, Nigerian-Canadian visual artist, curator, and policy analyst. I'm really excited and grateful for the opportunity to be speaking with you all today and to be in conversation with Ojo. Given the symposium's theme of empathy and emphasis on affect, relationality, and care, I'd like to frame my work in the theory in which it's grounded, but also emphasize the effective roots and elements of my work. The presentation is divided into 3 sections. I'll first talk about the politics of visibility as it relates to Blackness, particularly the concomitant reality of being both invisible and hypervisible as a Black person in Canada, and how that has informed and is reflected in my work. The second part of the presentation will focus on legibility, namely the expectations we may have as it relates to Black representation and Black life, and how I've learned and sought to interrupt and challenge them through my work. And the final part will actually focus on my curatorial practice, and we'll discuss otherwise ways of coming to know oneself, namely through the development of new kinds of relations. So as mentioned, the first section is going to be focused on visibility. And I'd like to start with this quote from Frantz Fanon: "Dirty Negro, or simply, look, a Negro. I came into this world anxious to uncover the meaning of things. My sole desire is to be at the origin of the world, and here I am, an object among other objects." So in the opening passages of the 5th chapter in Black Skin, White Masks, entitled The Lived Experience of the Black Man, Fanon describes an encounter with a young white boy and his mother. This particular passage has stuck with me since I first read it. It captured the feelings of walking down the street, fully comfortable in who I am, only to all at once be ripped from that sensation by a look or a comment and reduced to something beyond my own control. Similarly, for Fanon, the moment is one in which the narrator finds himself reduced to his race and seemingly stripped of all agency and indeed of his body altogether. As Fanon later describes in the passage, "My body returned to me, spread-eagled, disjointed, redone, draped in mourning on this white winter's day." I saw in the rawness and viscerality of his descriptions a reflection of my own experience of these moments of racialization, where your body is made hypervisible and ripped from you, a process that always felt incredibly intrusive and violent. This brings me to the first work I'd like to speak about, my 2019 2-part installation, "I Want You to Know That I Am Hiding Something From You, Since What I Might Be Is Uncontainable," which was shown at AHGSA Hall. And the exhibition itself was really an exploration of the politics of visibility as it relates to my body and lived experience. The second part of the title, "Since What I Might Be Is Uncontainable," is in reference to this particular room, which is a direct visualization of Fanon's passage. In a way, it becomes a simulacrum of my day-to-day navigation in society as a Black woman, with my body spread bare in front of all those who have the power to racialize me and then treat me accordingly, be it with violence or with love and care. At the center of the room is a collection of plexiglass limbs that are clustered together around a light source that projects their form onto the walls of the room, set up in such a way as to mimic an explosion, a natural extension of the violence Fanon alludes to in his text. But there's a certain level of ambiguity in the final result as to whether this is in fact a scene of violence or something else altogether. And I think this kind of hesitation in how you're meant to feel in this room is actually a key component of my art practice. As I was preparing for this talk, I read a 2003 article by Kara Keeling on Frantz Fanon and the problems of visual representation that reminded me of the following line in the chapter. The Negro is a toy in the white man's hands, so in order to shatter the hellish cycle, he explodes. Here, Fanon is speaking about this feeling of overdetermination and the anticipation of knowing already how things will unfold. So to subvert this, the Black body explodes itself, something Fanon sees as a step towards decolonization. Keeling describes the explosion as an uncanny violence that is in excess of any instrumentally conceived ends, a violence that cannot be contained or comprehended within social reality. And as will become clear with the rest of the presentation, I believe that hesitation is actually one of the most generative forms of affect because it allows for the creation of an interstice, an interval where racialized bodies can be seen otherwise in ways that go beyond what we are used to, that aren't easily comprehensible or are difficult to pin down. As you can see in the photo, as the audience navigates the room, the shadows of body parts flitting across their clothes and skin implicate them in this moment of racialization. And I think this is where the installation and its reception and actual creation exceeded my initial expectations of what this moment was meant to represent. In focusing so much on the violent aspects of racialization, I had almost forgotten that racialization is in essence a process of recognition and naming as well, and a recognition that extends beyond the power of the white gaze and also comes to encapsulate other ways of relating with and understanding the Black body. In particular, through this piece, I was able to start to explore, alongside the white gaze, the racialization that occurs between two similarly raced individuals. In those instances, what occurs then is the opportunity for kinship and understanding that can be as comforting as it can be restricting. To speak about racialization as a more open-ended process, to speak about multiple gazes is to understand Blackness as something that is harder to contain and define. As Marlon Riggs saw it, Blackness is not merely an identity, but rather a process that involves constant negotiation. To speak to the complexities of Black identity and Black community, the installation employs audio from Black Is, Black Ain't, the final documentary filmed by Marlon Riggs, which adeptly explores the give and take that comes with identifying and being identified as Black by other Black individuals. The documentary begins with a call and response led by Riggs, wherein he sings, "Black can get you over, Black can set you down. Black can let you move forward, Black can make you stumble around." Embracing the notion of paradox, since what I might be is uncontainable, hints at the contradictions of race as a lived reality. The process of racialization, in many ways an act of naming, gives rise to both violence on the basis of difference and a sense of kinship predicated on shared experiences. So in this piece, Blackness is never and or, but rather yes and. Blackness as a lived reality is something that is always in excess and cannot be contained. From there, we move on to the next room of the installation, which deals with the other end of the spectrum of visibility, invisibility. And invisibility is something I've often thought about and experienced, as best symbolized by Ronaldo Walcott's assertion of Blackness in Canada as an absented presence always under erasure. As with hypervisibility, this act of erasure is one of violence that eats away at one's sense of self, but also has material repercussions and economically and socially. But this innate association of invisibility with powerlessness and oppression began to shift as I was introduced to the work of Martinican philosopher Edouard Glissant, whose concept of opacity, a lack of transparency and a way of not giving yourself away completely, suggested a certain form of agency in the act of resisting representation and visibility. All at once, Glissant's politics of refusal offered a kind of refuge. In a way, by withholding a part of myself, I was refusing to be fully seen, fixed or racialized in a particular way. And this gets us to questions I've been grappling with since 2017, which relate to the limits inherent in the logic of representation and the possibility of abstraction. Sorry, just trying to figure out where I am. So this brings us to this particular room, which is actually the first part of the installation. I want you to know that I'm hiding something from you. The exhibition initially began as an exploration of the concept of objectivity and the ways in which it has been used as a way of asserting white male dominance. In many ways, this was for me directly connected with my interest in feminist standpoint theory, which directly challenges this notion of objectivity, as well as Bell Hook's discussion of the margins as a site of knowledge production and something one does not want to give up or surrender as part of moving into the center. In moving from proposal to exhibition, one particular image took root and became difficult to shake. A podium in the shape of a slave auction block in the middle of a room laden with hidden imagery and messages. The image came to me very clearly, and everything else about the installation followed from there. Playing on ideas from feminist standpoint theory, the podium eventually became the centerpiece for the first installation. I want you to know that I'm hiding something from you, which can only be fully experienced from one unique position within the gallery room, from atop the wooden steps. Here, within the space of the installation, as in society, what is seen and unseen is dictated by one's positionality. In order to truly understand the piece, the observer must become the observed, must give up the comfort of their position on the floor to mount a podium and become the object of interest for others. In many ways, this action asks us to value the perspectives and knowledge production of those people who had been enslaved, to understand that they had seen and understood the world in ways that would have been impossible for anyone else. Beyond this emphasis on the biased rather than objective nature of perception, this room also aims to explore the potentiality inherent in hesitation. Upon entering the room, the viewer is greeted by the sight of the podium in the center, with sheets of red plexiglass hanging overhead and two printed red banners on opposite walls. What I wanted was for the viewer to enter the room, be confused, and hesitate. They would be faced with a couple of choices. Either go through quickly, not see anything, and leave, or stay in the room and try to engage with the work in a more productive way, like getting closer to the banners. Or, if they were courageous enough, they could go and stand on the podium. If they chose the latter, they would be rewarded by the materialization of hidden images and messages on the opposite banners, which can only be seen through the red screens. So again, for me, in this installation, hesitation is generative. It creates an opening, an opportunity to glimpse into a different way of seeing. To connect the dots between glissant and this piece, I need to go back to the title of the work. I want you to know that I am hiding something from you. In many ways, this piece actually challenges the notion of what a self-portrait is meant to look like. If Blackness is a process rather than solely an identity, how then can we represent it? As part of this exploration, I've been really interested by the notion of what Sampata Aranque calls a Black radical aesthetic that endeavors to recompose the relationship between the body and visibility, often by sidestepping representational mandates towards accuracy. For Aranque, Black radical aesthetic is about disturbing visibility as a measure of Black presence, and they tie this concept directly to Glissant's notion of opacity, noting that opacity denies complete incorporation and directs us to ways of being and knowing that are vibrant, untamed, and free-floating. So this brings me to a further question I had to grapple with when creating this work. What is it that I want to show the audience when they get on that podium? If this is a self-portrait, how exactly do I want to appear? And what do these hidden images reveal? This is one of the hidden images that the viewer is introduced to when they step on the podium, except they don't know that this is what they're actually looking at. In many ways, the entire installation is just a multi-layered game of hide and seek, wherein I'm hoping to cause the viewer to pause, to find a moment of hesitation, to think about what and how we perceive bodies, particularly racialized bodies. What they see from the podium is the dark silhouette of a spider that, unbeknownst to them, is made of human body parts, a hybrid depiction of Anansi, the Guinean trickster spider. Anansi is neither God nor human, good nor evil. Crossing boundaries and borders, he is seen as a liminal character. For me, the trickster figure provides a model for how to go beyond the dichotomy of good-bad representation and instead inhabit and claim the space in between projected and fixed identities. To be a trickster is to be uncontainable and unknowable. What's important here is that even if you see me, once you get on that podium, you haven't really seen me properly. I'm still hiding, taking refuge in a politics of refusal. Connecting the dots between these concepts of visibility, racialization, and opacity is this quote by Alessandro Raengo on the sleeve of the visual, "Race as Face Value." By radically exteriorizing the body, making it untouchable and unfixable, these works cut through photography, understood as a functional model built on specific correspondence between the outside and inside of the body. They cut through it because they leave incomplete, unfulfilled, and unaccomplished one of its fundamental expectations, which is the fact that racialization would deliver a perfectly contained and recognizable visual object. The next section has to do with legibility. What she liked was candy buttons and books, and painted music, deep blue or delicate silver, and the west sky so altering, viewed from the steps of the back porch, and dandelions. And so begins Maud Martha, the only novel by Gwendolyn Brooks, a series of vignettes that give a glimpse into the life of the protagonist. Hidden in this first passage is the understanding of Maud Martha as a desiring subject, as someone whose identity can be introduced and summarized by a list of things that she finds pleasure in. The revolutionary nature of this is all the more powerful in its understated presentation. What does it mean for us to live our lives as though our sole purpose is to understand and explore our desires? In his book, The Sovereignty of Quiet, Kevin Kwashi extols the value of thinking of Black life, not in terms of publicness and resistance, but rather in terms of quiet. This, he argues, allows for an exploration of the full range of one's inner life, one's desires, ambitions, hungers, vulnerabilities, fears. It is Maud Martha's ability to escape into the quiet of her own interiority that gives her the agency to define herself based on her desires. In 2020, I was part of Made of Gold, Honey, and Marigold, an exhibition curated by Genevieve Wallen at the Robert McLaughlin Gallery in Oshawa that acted as an exploration of the sun as an activator of sensory engagement, provoking deeper contemplations on sensuality, eroticism, pleasure, and the politics of desire. My inclusion in the exhibition gave me the chance to rethink my understandings of Blackness and what it means to simply be. Through the exhibition, I was able to ask myself the question, what would it mean to center Black pleasure rather than Black pain? The works I created/included in Made of Honey, Gold, and Marigold explore the capacity of Black bodies to desire as well as to be desired, to indulge in pleasures that range from eating their favorite foods to moving into sunlight against the body of a loved one. In particular, my 2020 installation, And the World Waited to Caress Her, was inspired both by this line of questioning and Audre Lorde's conceptualization of the erotic, not as sexual desire, but as a way of feeling deeply and intimately, and as the threshold to an ever-emergent hidden interiority. And so over the period of a couple of months, I spent time reflecting on the things, moments, brief interludes that brought me joy and pleasure. And I wrote them down into a short list, some of which you can see here. What I had assumed would be an easy process turned out instead to be quite challenging and laborious. It was difficult for me to switch gears in this way, to tune everything else out in order to turn inwards and ask questions that I had never made a priority, such as, what makes me happy? In line with the exhibition's exploration of the sensoriality of the sun, I knew that I wanted to offer the list of the things I desired up to the sun as a prayer, as a form of meditation. So I took the list of things that made me happy and pasted them on the windows of the ceiling of the Robert McLaughlin Gallery's main hall, such that as the sun rises and bears down on the gallery, the list is revealed. The sound of utensils clattering in outdoor courtyards, the weight of an arm around my waist, the bright orange of my mother's yam porridge. Conversely, at night, the words disappear without a trace, a retreat into a kind of quiet born not out of resistance, but out of the inability of any one thing to capture that which cannot ever be fully glimpsed or understood. In many ways, the final result also challenges notions of what a self-portrait can look like, as did the previous work that I discussed. Can who I am as a Black woman, as a person, be sufficiently represented by this list of things I love? How is it that we expect Black womanhood to be represented? What is it that we are allowed to divulge and discuss? This question makes me think of Bell Hook's statement that time and time again, Black women are called to only speak from that space in the margin that is a sign of deprivation, a wound, an unfilled longing, to speak only their pain. Closely associated to this question is one pertaining to legibility. When we speak otherwise, is this legible and intelligible to other people? The words that are printed and pasted on the windows can't actually be read by the audience. They are not, in fact, even for the consumption of the audience. They are for the sun. They are a prayer, an invocation to the sun, to whom my desires and my pleasures can surely be understood and answered. So the second challenge then is, for whom do we create work? If we no longer expect to be understood by those around us, where else can we turn? This relationship with nature as a co-conspirator and audience is one that I'm increasingly thinking about, and is very much rooted in this particular work. The second work of mine that was included and made of honey, gold, and gold, honey, and marigold, I might have switched those around by accident, I'm sorry, Jen, was the uses of the erotic, which is in reference to Audre Lorde's essay of the same title. This piece is from 2017 and was my first foray into exploring Lorde's notion of the erotic as something that allows us to reclaim our power and gain a new understanding, a new sense of self, including in relation to another. From a distance, the work is a triptych of the Black female body, open to whomever's projections and interpretations of its meaning. As a kind of funny story related to this, I was recently on a date outside, and I was showing the person photos of my work, and they were kind of quickly skimming through everything and until they got to this particular work, and they spent 2 minutes essentially just staring at my butt, which was great, and a reminder of why it is that I don't date anymore. But here, intimacy is a trigger for a new way of engaging with the Black body. If one looks closely enough, allows their eyes to trail the gentle rise and fall of a spine, they will find written in those images words that speak to deep yearning and deeper still pleasures, words that are vestiges of my journey to discovering the power of the erotic within myself. And this is the final section of the presentation, and I'm not actually sure how long this has been yet. But anyways. So relations. As part of this final section, I'll be switching from discussing my own art practice to speaking about my curatorial practice, which consists of one curated exhibition so far, but hopefully that won't be the only one. Sorry. Okay, great, thank you. More specifically, I'll be speaking about They Forgot That We Were Seeds, an exhibition I curated at the Carleton University Art Gallery in February 2020. Core to the exhibition is the question of relations to the land, being Turtle Island, of course, and the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation in particular, in the context of Ottawa. Relationships or relations to its first inhabitants, and relations with kin, both past and present. Though my focus on Glissant has always been on his notion of opacity, here too his notion of relation is a powerful way of thinking beyond identity to relations that don't enforce a politics of visibility that hinge on the need to know and categorize. The idea for the exhibition came from my time working as a policy analyst on the development of Canada's first food policy. It was the first national food policy that covered all aspects of the food system, from production to waste, touching on forming themes, including food security. In my position there, I ended up developing a strategy for engaging Indigenous communities on the policy. That entailed building relationships with organizations such as the Assembly of First Nations and Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami, and traveling to Yellowknife, Nain, and Thunder Bay to engage firsthand with communities. During this time, I was constantly in conversation with Indigenous folks, Inuit and First Nations communities in particular, learning about their food systems as well as their relationship to land, which of course goes hand in hand. These conversations made me realize just how political food is and prompted me to start questioning my own relationship to food, as well as to this land that we now call Canada. Over the course of close to 2 years, these questions kept bubbling up inside of me with no outlet through which I could begin to address them. When you're working as a representative of the federal government and doing that kind of engagement, it often supersedes other relationships you may have with the people you're working with. You become a physical embodiment of government, and there can be a lot of tension and mistrust for good reason that you have to navigate. As mentioned, it left me with a lot of unanswered questions around the kinds of relationships that are possible between Indigenous folks and Black Canadians. I knew I couldn't quite address these questions through my job, so I instead turned to art as a vehicle to further explore them. And thus was born They Forgot That We Were Seeds, an exhibition bringing together 8 Black and Indigenous women artists: Casey Adams, Deanna Bowen, Roxana Farrell, Bushra Junaid, Amy Malbeuf, Meryl McMaster, Cheyenne Sundance, and Catherine Tekpani, to explore their relationship to Canada and each other through the lens of food. Touching on issues of land, migration, and food justice and sovereignty, the exhibition offered a glimpse into decolonial and sustainable futurities rooted in Indigenous worldviews. The first part of the exhibition looked at the centuries-old trade of cod and sugar and its implications for enslaved Africans in the Caribbean and their descendants, as well as Indigenous peoples throughout Canada. More specifically, the works of Bushra Junaid and Roxana Farrell explored the hidden ties between Newfoundland and the Caribbean as part of the transatlantic slave trade, namely the production of sugar and salt and their exchange for cod fished off the coast of Newfoundland and fed to enslaved Africans as a cheap source of protein, revealing new connections and highlighting current-day legacies. From its production in the Caribbean, They Forgot That We Were Seeds also traces sugar's arrival into Turtle Island. Sugar, flour, salt, cream, and lard were provided as government rations to First Nations peoples displaced from their traditional lands and moved onto reserves. Casey Adams and Amy Malbeuf complicate the relationship Indigenous folks have to the 5 white gifts, as they are known: pushing against narratives that convey their effects on Indigenous communities solely through statistics around the prevalence of diabetes. Another chapter of the exhibition takes as its starting point the migration of African-American pioneers to the prairies in the 1900s, drawn by the promise of free land after fleeing Jim Crow laws in the southern United States. Bringing together the works of Deanna Bowen, who traces her family's migration from the birth of her great-great-great-great-grandfather somewhere in Africa to the journey from Oklahoma to Alberta, and Meryl McMaster, who locates herself in prairie landscapes that speak to the centuries-old relationship her ancestors had with the land and animals such as buffalo. The exhibition asks that we collapse time and space to see the way in which Black settlement was made possible by the forced removal of Indigenous peoples from that very land decades earlier, through a treaty-making process that was facilitated by hunger and starvation due to the devastation of Indigenous food sources. But of course, undergirding all of this are policies by the state that aim to control both Indigenous and Black bodies, including preventing the entry of Black people into Canada and their incorporation into the national imaginary. While many of the works speak to the past and its ongoing effects on the present, the works of both Cheyenne Sundance and Catherine Tikpani spoke to decolonial futurities rooted in relations between Black and Indigenous peoples. With the time that remains, I'd like to focus on this aspect of the exhibition, and particularly Catherine's documentation of A Harvest More Plentiful, an intimate gathering of Black and Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people that we organized as part of public programming in advance of opening the exhibition. At the nexus of public programming and performance, the gathering and the inclusion of its trace elements in the exhibition operated as a glimpse into otherwise possibilities. This is important because the organization of this event and its incorporation into the exhibition was rooted in an understanding of the tense balance between visibility and voyeurism as it relates not only to Blackness and indigeneity as separate and intersecting identities, but the ways in which we are expected to gather and relate to one another. This gathering was meant for us solely, a space to share a meal and reimagine past and current relations and ways of being with one another. In organizing the gathering, I knew that I didn't want to be the one facilitating the event, for fear that I would replicate the same systems of knowledge extraction that often take place in government consultations. I wanted to be in a position where I could unlearn and relearn otherwise ways of bringing people together. For this reason, the Carleton University Art Gallery and I hired two independent facilitators, Muna Mohammed, a Black woman, and Cole Poplinsky, a Two-Spirit Algonquin and Métis individual. They were the ones, in fact, that advised against using the gathering as a moment to talk about shared traumas, but instead advised focusing on merely sharing space with one another. They set up the room such that one half consisted of a sharing circle and the other of a long table where all participants were invited to share a meal together. The entire event was incredibly organic, starting off with a prayer by Lama McGregor, an elder from Kitigan-Zibi, who then invited each participant to introduce themselves and share what they wanted. What came after was a moment where everyone shared much more than I could have ever expected, freely, and were met with compassion and care by the rest of the participants. When it came to my turn, I shared the origins of the project, my realization of my complicity within the settler colonial project, my fear of making the wrong step and causing more harm than good, my desire for connection. And I, in turn, was greeted with so much care and compassion in that space. The photo that always gets me in my feelings is this image of my mother and the youngest participant at the gathering, a young Guinea woman. For me, sharing this moment with my mother, who has been living in Canada since 1998, but has never really developed a relationship with Indigenous folks, was really crucial. My mom and I cooked some Nigerian dishes. We also had 2 caterers, an Inuk caterer and a First Nations caterer. And Quebec was able to source some bisak or sorrel, a traditional West African drink made of hibiscus, a plant native to the region, and shared with family and friends as a form of hospitality. This event was really just about coming together, sharing space, and expressing hospitality and kind of extending what kinship can look like to a wider group of very different individuals. Underlying this event were questions requiring further exploration. What does it mean to understand Indigenous people and people of African descent as Indigenous to their own lands and displaced from it in very different ways? What are the ways in which we can hold space together? There are so many questions that this experience has left me with, and so many new ways of understanding myself that I have gained from it, from the complicated nature of my identity as a settler, to my awareness of the ways in which colonialism has dispossessed me of my language and the traditional ways of knowing of my ancestors. But more importantly, it is teaching me how to find myself through relations that don't require absolute knowledge of the other, but instead an ability to come together and merely share space. And to end, I just have this quote from Charles Richard Johnson that just really resonates with where I'm at right now in terms of my thoughts for what I'm, and this extends broadly beyond just my art practice, just where I'm at generally. People don't know who we are. Even we aren't sure who we are. But isn't that precisely the perennial human dilemma? That we are, after all, beings who must fashion moment by moment what meanings our lives will have. Beings in process who are subject in a single lifetime to change, transformation, self-contradiction, and constant evolution. And that's it. Okay. Do I stop sharing?
Yeah, you can, no problem.
Okay, cool.
That was excellent. Kosi, thank you so much for that presentation and for sharing with us. That was beautiful. Every time I thought I had a question, you kind of became more thoughtful and more generous in your descriptions, that I just ended up with more so comments about some of the things that really stood out to me and that felt really special, more so than questions. So I'm hoping I can kind of just dive in with some of the comments I have. Hopefully a question will emerge and we can kind of start with that. And then maybe after about 10 minutes, we can go in for audience questions.
Sounds perfect.
Yeah, okay. So in your exhibition at AHGSA Nia Centre, I just thought that was just so well put together and thoughtfully done. The experience of Blackness is one that is always shifting. It's so complicated. It's always changing. And as much as we can point to scholars like Frantz Fanon and bell hooks and others to start to kind of gesture towards what we feel, it is still hard to make people feel what we feel. And I find that the way you used that space and the way you directed audiences to that space was so profound and was so special. So I just wanted to ask you, I guess, how do you think of space as one of your materials? Because it very much is. And what's that process like, I guess, in using space as a material?
Yeah, that's exactly why I you've seen the evolution of my work, where initially it was more kind of like portraits of Black women. And then in 2017, it shifted towards more photo-based kind of interactive works. And now it's really about installation, because you get that element of space and you really get to play with space, not only, but also other people's bodies as kind of materials in a way. So there's an element of experimentation because you don't know how people will actually engage with the work, right? But for me, it's always been rooted, as mentioned before, in my interest in standpoint theory and the margins in the center. And I always just want to recreate that margin and center kind of dynamic within a space and kind of see how you can get people to understand how that positionality, be it in the margins or in the center, really shifts how you can understand things, how you produce knowledge and the kinds of knowledge you have access to. So I'm constantly trying to do that. But I think where I want to go from now on is more kind of just experimental in a way, because with the exhibition at AHGSA and that podium in particular, there was a sense in which I had expectations as to how much people would hesitate before getting up on the podium. But then you get to the opening and people are like coming. There were so many people at the opening. It was beautiful. It was great. But people weren't afraid of getting on that podium. They were just lining up and just like going on. And I'm like, you guys know it's fashioned after slave auction block. This is really interesting that you're rushing to get on this. But they didn't know, right? So I guess there's that level of like, I like the fact that I'm making assumptions, or I have these hypotheses that I'm testing. And I really want that to be a more integral element of my practice as well. That's kind of playful in a way.
I really like that because it touches back on the aspect of hesitation that you
Yeah.
referred to multiple points. And you want the audience to feel some sort of hesitation. But that takes a certain level of self-awareness and social awareness and a little bit of history that they might not be bringing into the exhibition. That was really beautiful.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. I also want to touch on the aspect of understanding versus being understood, because those are really two sides of the same coin and really core to empathy. So if you wanted to talk about that, because I know some of your works are about being understood, but very much your curatorial practice was about understanding. And I want to know what different skills or tools that you needed to employ to do each of those things effectively, and maybe how you can, really demonstrate to others how to do the same.
That's a really hard one, being understood and understanding. I definitely think that they require very different skills, and I'm still trying to develop the skills required for being understanding. I think it requires a really kind of intentional listening. And I know that there's an author, Dylan Robinson, who has this book on hungry listening, I think. And it's really, really fascinating. I'm not going to speak about it more because I do not know enough. I just know that it's it's a really, really interesting approach. But definitely, I think that there are particular skills that are required to be able to listen appropriately, not in order to kind of fit someone into a box and to categorize them, but to let them be themselves and to kind of like avoid that urge to render someone transparent, right? That kind of AHGSA is speaking about. And in terms of being understood, I think I have to try and just let go of having expectations that people will allow me to be myself. You know, people will always try and put you in a box because it's so hard to do otherwise. We're trained to do that. So I'm trying to learn how to be zen and mindful and not care. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I totally feel that. It comes back to that, also the aspect of being seen. And as you said, Glissant speaks about the transformative power or the agency that can be in this refusal of this opacity. But at the same time, there's also a deep and important need to be seen, because that's how we otherwise connect with people. So
Yeah.
how do you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a really hard one as well. Because like recognition is really key, right? Like as human beings, we want to belong, and to belong, you need to be recognized as being part of a group, right? You need to be seen as such. And I think that's where like Marlon Riggs does such a beautiful job of navigating that complexity, where Blackness it's a community that you enter into. It's a beautiful community. Like when you think about Blackness, yes, there's a lot of like crappy stuff and like the way in which it came to be. It's like colonialism, slavery, etc. But when I see videos or memes, like just knowing that I'm Black, that I can participate in that, there's a beauty there. But I don't know. It's a really hard question. It's a really interesting one, but it's one that I definitely need to think a little bit more through.
Yeah, it's something that I'm constantly thinking about, and how to be simultaneously visible and strategically invisible.
Yeah, exactly.
Communicate something to you. And I do think you achieved this in your installation. I want you to know that I'm hiding something from you. Because as you said, even as people got onto the podium and they looked through the plexiglass, they didn't necessarily understand what they saw, right? It takes some prior knowledge of Anansi the spider to kind of put together what you're getting at. So I still think opportunity there to be kind of hidden in plain sight, which is really special.
Yes. Yeah, no, exactly that. And yeah, a lot of people would just like get on the podium, see the spider and be like, what the hell? Why is there a spider? Like, what am I supposed to get out of this? And I think that was actually really exciting. And I don't know, like in terms of affect, I talked about like hesitation as being really generative, but I think that also there's playfulness that I think is really fun. And I think that's what the trickster embodies. And that's why it's able to teach you things, right? Because it teaches you a lesson in a way that you're not expecting.
Yeah, I like that you also bring attention to the teaching aspect of it, because I do find your work to be quite pedagogical. Because it's very
really?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. And this is something that could translate well into a classroom if you're ever into...
You can teach my work.
Yeah. I think it's super cool. So I think I'm kind of capped for questions. I'm just still processing and still thinking through so many of the things you do, because of course, with my background in women and gender studies and post-colonial theory and feminist studies, you're touching on so many of the authors that I study, and just seeing you exemplify it is just so profound and so interesting that it'll take me some more time to keep thinking about it, and I'll probably message you again.
No worries.
Then we can open up to the audience. If there are any questions, we're happy to take some. I'll just give a couple minutes to get people sorted, or to let people get sorted. Okay, I will pop in with one more question while we wait for anyone for the audience. So there are a number of feminist and post-colonial scholars that you're clearly inspired by and that you are working in conversation with. I was wondering about other artists, whether they're contemporary or modern artists, that may also be influencing your work, or that you...
No, that's a really good question. And I find what's kind of hard about like having such split interests and like careers is that I feel like I'm not always engaging with new work and new artists and new thought, unfortunately. But I had a hiatus from about 2015 to 2017 where I really was doing that, and I was identifying artists whose practice really inspired me. And for me, it was really like Carrie Mae Weems and Lorna Simpson and Lauren O'Grady, more contemporary artists that are doing work that, I don't know, like who, I actually really don't know that many. Like, I wish I could name, like I'll see their work on Instagram and I'll really like it, but whose work is really informing mine, not so much because I don't pay that much attention. And I just read old texts that I read like years ago. I'm still thinking about it. I'm not even that up to date with like the new theories or anything like that, unfortunately.
Well, that makes sense. It's a lot, you know.
Yeah.
Do very much the artist hat and then the historian hat. They're two different. Right. One takes you away from the other.
Exactly. It's really hard. Yeah.
But when you mentioned Lorna Simpson, I definitely see some of the influence there, and also with Carrie Mae Weems, the way you approach your work and that you offer text as well and captions inside your work, I think is really something that you see from Carrie Mae Weems as well.
Yeah, for sure. The emphasis on text definitely is inspired by both of those women.
Mm-hmm. I also had another thought about your choice to use your own body in your work, particularly as you transition from drawing and portraiture towards photography and installation. One of the recurring factors is that you use photographs of your own body. And you shared a really funny but also unfortunate experience on a date where, you know, the kind of thing that you're speaking back towards happened to you in a very intimate setting. Yeah. And so that's also partially my own hesitation with this thing, but
right.
Not the productive hesitation that you talk about, but like a different kind of hesitation. But I'm just very curious as to why you continue to like center your body and how that kind of relates to this process being like self-reflexive. And yeah, if you can speak on that a little more.
I'm actually not sure if I'm going to continue centering my body, right? I haven't really created new work in a minute, but the ones that I have created have either kind of been me cutting up body parts and then reassembling them into spiders, which is not particularly like, if I show that to the guy, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't find it sexy, but so I feel like I'm moving away from more kind of easy representations of the Black woman's body and really starting to challenge how we can think of a self-portrait of a Black woman. And I think that is likely to continue in the future. But I do miss working with my body because I think, women's bodies are beautiful, Black women's bodies are beautiful. And I like working with my body. I think, I was in the past doing a lot of work on kind of reclaiming the Black woman's body and subjectivity and radical subjectivity and so on. And for me, the work of people like Roxanne, I'm forgetting her name now. Anyways, a lot of artists, like Black women artists from the States who work with their body, Karen Mayweather's been a perfect example, working with the image as a way of reasserting their agency. No, not Roxane Gay, someone else. It's not Roxane Gay, isn't she a writer?
She's an author,
so
yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. No, it's someone else, unfortunately. Roxanne Green, maybe? Oh, I forgot.
I'm not sure, but I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate that a lot. There's the element of reclamation, but then also, like Fanon says, exploding the representation and then reworking it and then complicating it. I remember one of your earlier exhibitions, I think it was your first solo exhibition at Studio 66 in Ottawa, because I was there for that one.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, and you had invited some friends to also be part of. You had photographed some friends who were in it, and a few others, and you had taken different features that are racialized, so like the nose, the lips, and then you had to arrange them in a certain way to sort of abstract them, but then also kind of point to how like. And then that's the thing about Blackness that's just so curious to me. Like we talk like it's abstract and it's this. It could be anything, but it's something that is quite identifiable, right? And we're still kind of articulating why that is and what that means.
Yeah, no, that was, it was basically a game of like, guess my race that I was trying to get people to engage in, which was really interesting. And, a lot of my work, I didn't really talk about it here, but it's very much like rooted in phenomenology. It's like when Frantz Fanon is writing the lived experience of the Black man, he's actually in dialogue with two like main phenomenologists, Hegel and Maurice Merleau-Ponty. And there's a lot of work on phenomenology and kind of just like visibility and racialized perception and it being like a projection, but it kind of hinges on these visible identifiers, right? And that's where you have race and gender. Like as much as you want to talk about it being a social construct, it hinges on being visibly identifiable, right? So I think, it's definitely what you're talking about. And that was an interesting project. I think, I don't know, if I were to go back to it, a lot of things I would do differently. Like it is what it is.
We don't look back, we're only forward. Okay, so we have a question from the audience, from Cynthia Hammond. Thank you, Cynthia, for your question. Cynthia says, thank you, Kosisochukwu, for this beautiful talk. One of the things that strikes me about your work is the variety of spatial scales involved. You work in the proscribed space of the gallery, but also in the space of the community or cultural center, and then in the space of the contested territory. I was wondering if you could say a few words about how space or spatiality is part of your practice. For example, you're creating spatial experiences through the scenography of your exhibition, for example, but it seemed to me that the space of the talking circle and the long table was also really crucial to what emerged, holding space in that project.
I am going to copy this question and save it because this will help me in the future. Let me see. Sorry, I'm just actually doing that right now. In terms of actually answering the question, I think, it's something I'm still kind of trying to think about. I think that space and spatiality is such a core element of my work, and it's something that I haven't fully been able to explore in terms of theoretical frameworks, for example, that pertain to spatiality. I've been really focused on racialization phenomenology and other things, but I really need to look into spatiality as you know, a core feature of my art practice and something that needs to be explored on its own basis. But I definitely agree that this idea of that shared talking circle and the long table was really crucial and central to the project itself, that event. And it makes me think about a lot of work around design, right? Because what it is that you're designing a space in such a way that people feel and are able to share and discuss in a particular way. So that gets you into design as something that can be central to like decoloniality and decolonization and so on as well. So that's something. There's a book that I really want to read that's basically about, oh, what's it called? I don't remember, but it's about decolonizing design. And that's an area I really want to go into. And I think that would really help me start touching on what I've already done, but also spatiality and design being something that's used inherently. Then you're talking about how people are able to navigate and are able to benefit from your designs as well. So no real answers, just like other kind of areas or paths I'd like to explore.
Thank you, Kosi. That's really beautiful. And thank you, Cynthia, again for your question. It reminds me of a couple of things. One, Catherine McKittrick's Demonic Grounds, Black Woman, the Cartography is a Struggle, where she really explores how space and the control of space and the tradition of cartography is integral to the making of identities and relationships between people. So your work definitely addresses that, and particularly the exhibition that you curated, They Forgot We Were Seeds. I also think of Sherry Farrell-Rossette's methodology, or at least her paper on kitchen table methodologies. And this is something that's part of Indigenous communities and has been articulated by other scholars. But just the idea of bringing people, especially in Indigenous communities, around food, and that being sort of the point of connection and the point of just the point of connection and the idea of space being not just the physical space, but this intangible space as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. So I feel like part of this is also reminding me of the importance of grounding your work in theory. So that's what I've done a lot with like the first exhibition that I talked about. But as it's interesting, as I've kind of moved from then on, I've been kind of rooting my work more just solely in my lived experience and kind of in affect. So really talking about feelings and like asking questions related to feelings and just focusing on care, relations, and so on. But yeah, it's just a reminder to go back to the theory as well still. And I find like being back in school, I don't know, like, yeah, I'm trying to, anyways, this is something we can discuss at another point because we've kind of already talked about it before. But I don't really have an answer to your question, sorry.
It was more of a comment. It was
just
for me because, again, like there's so many overlaps in what we're interested in. And I've been looking at in the work of Ruby Onyechi-Amanse, who's a Nigerian-British artist based in the US. And then I've also been thinking now about, my settler identity, what it means to be Indigenous elsewhere and a settler here. And I just find these conversations really fascinating. And I'm just really grateful for your presentation. Really. We'll see if we have any other questions. I'll wait another couple minutes, and if not, we can start to wrap up. So Cynthia has provided a follow-up to your answer. She says, they say, I so agree with you about design, invitation, power. Thank you for this great answer.
And we got another question in the chat, I think, about what I'm up to now. I am studying. I don't think I actually mentioned that. I'm doing an MSc in Inequalities in Social Science at the London School of Economics, which is technically in the Department of Sociology. So I'm spending this year really focusing on school I will nonetheless be creating new work hopefully soon. I think there was a prize with Mohr Gallery. I see that Shai is on here as well. So there's a new work prize or whatever. So I'm hopefully going to be able to create new work when I get back to Ottawa in September. So I'm in the process of just like kind of getting new ideas, thinking about things, and hopefully when I get back, I can actually start creating again, which I'm really excited for. I am learning a lot through school, and slowly, like what I'm learning is starting to kind of manifest into ideas about new works. So I'm really excited for that.
Okay, Kosi, thank you so much for your talk. This was wonderful. It was amazing, very enriching, and we're really excited to see what you have next.
I'm
going to pass it. I'm going to pass it back to Michelle and Megan to wrap us up.
Actually, I think we got one more question, which we do have time to answer. So.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
Okay, I think it just came in. So we could do this one and then wrap up for sure.
Okay, perfect. Okay, this final question is from MK Ajemanu. It says, thank you, Kosisochukwu, for this talk, your words, and your art. In your exhibition, And the World Waited to Caress Her, I love how you incorporated nature as a material in your work and art practice, and the question of, for whom do we create work for? How do you think about incorporating nature in your further art practice?
Brilliant question, because I have no idea. I really don't know yet. It's I think that's what really excited me about that piece. It was very different, and it got me thinking from a totally different perspective, and definitely gets me thinking about, again, some of the things I'm learning right now. So it's definitely something I'm interested in exploring a bit further, but without real concrete ideas as to how I would do that. But I'm glad to hear that it resonated.
Okay, and thank you. Now that was our final question, and I will pass it back to Michelle and Megan of AHGSA to wrap us up.
Sweet. Thank you so much for that wonderful talk, Kosi and Ojo. It was so enlightening and poignant, poetic, and very, very timely. Kosi, you had Sarah, myself, Michelle, and Maggie like crying at one point, and then 2 minutes later giggling about your note on dating. And we hope your next date goes a little bit better and that they appreciate the breadth of your artwork. It was awesome hearing your perspectives and considerations and the potentials empathy may pose within both social and artistic spheres, namely in relation to the visibility, resilience, and beauty of the Black female body. It was an awesome way to end our conference weekend. And Kosi, we realize it's late, so we don't want to keep you past your bedtime, but thank you so much for spending and ending your evening with us. It was an absolute pleasure. We'd also like to extend a major merci to Alexandre Page for graciously guiding us through these technological platforms and helping us with the webinar format. It's definitely been a bit of a learning curve for all of us involved. If you wish to see more, we also have an accompanying visual vitrine exhibition curated by myself and Michelle Sones, available to view on Art Steps platform, which you can find by visiting our link in our Instagram, which is at AHGSA Concordia, and it's in our bio. And if you missed any of the other panel sessions this week, they've been recorded and they'll be shared via YouTube later whenever they are edited. And to our attendees, thank you for coming and encouraging our efforts, namely in a time where physical connections aren't possible. I really wish we could all be together at the university right now. Events like this wouldn't be possible if it weren't for you. And I hope you have a great rest of your weekend.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much to Kosi and Ojo, Sarah, Megan, Maggie, Alex, also Brooke and Jordan. This has been an incredible weekend. I'm so proud of all the work that everybody's done. And yeah, we did it, guys. So have a good night, everyone. Thanks for coming. Bye.